I was reading Exodus several months ago, and in Exodus chapter 20, God's giving pretty much the gist of the Ten Commandments. And at the end of that chapter, he says, "Tell the people of Israel, you have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. Don't make with me gods of silver, nor make for yourselves gods of gold." And then he goes on to say, if you make an altar, make it of stones that haven't been worked on. If a tool is lifted upon the stone, it's been polluted. At the beginning of this chapter, he also says the second commandment, which was, don't make any graven images of anything that is like earth, anything on earth, or anything in the water below, or anything in heaven. But specifically, what I really noticed was him saying, you have seen that I can speak to you from heaven, so don't make with me gods of silver or gold in order to communicate with me. After chapter 20, the next 3 chapters, there is instruction on judgments. So how to deal with certain crimes. Like if this person does this, this is their punishment. And then on chapter 24, everybody in Israel sprinkles blood all over themselves and sprinkles blood all over all these things and repeats this oath. Then he tells Moses to go up into the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights and fast alone to get word from God. And what's interesting is he comes out of this in chapter 25. He comes out and with specific instructions on how to build the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, which completely goes against what was already said in Exodus 20. You have seen, I have spoken to you from heaven. Don't make with me gods of silver or gold. And then in chapter 25, he's saying, make with me gods of gold or silver in order to communicate with me at the mercy seat. That's how I'm going to be communicating with you. But it's like, wait, what you just said to tell the people of Israel that you have seen, I can speak to you from heaven. Why do we need the mercy seat to speak to you? And he's very specific in Exodus 20. He says, don't make with me gods of gold or silver. So he's saying, if I come to you and tell you to make gods of gold or silver to communicate with me, don't do it. Because you have seen, I can speak to you from heaven. And so that's something that really, really confuses me. And I can't find anything online or anybody online discussing this contradiction or this back and forth type thing. But what I found also very interesting about it is what happened before the instruction for the ark is that Moses went up to go into the wilderness basically for 40 days and 40 nights, much like Jesus did. But when Jesus went into the wilderness after 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, he wasn't met with by God. He was met with by Satan. And what Satan did was very reminiscent of what God had been doing in the Old Testament. He offered Jesus land, kingdoms, and power, and he attempted to trick Christ into sin and submission. That's what he was trying to do, and Christ didn't fall for it. But what do you think that the people in the Old Testament would have thought if an angel of God, which is what Satan described himself as being, came to them and after 40 days and 40 nights of starving in the wilderness, came to them and conversed with him in the way that Satan conversed with Christ that day in the wilderness? What would they have thought? How would they have responded? Would they have known that they were being fooled and tricked into selling their soul for power in the world? For worldly power? It's interesting to me also thinking about Job. It seems to me that Job nearly fulfilled the law. And it seems also to me that that was something that was not to be done. In Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God says to himself, they have become like us, knowing good and evil. Now we have to prevent them from eating from the tree of life, lest they live forever. And so they kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, blocked it off by 2 cherubim spinning swords. And what exactly do you think that was continued on to do to prevent the people from taking from the tree of life? Could it have been that they were making covenants and promises and basically selling their soul for a price that they couldn't pay back? In contract laws, there's certain instances where a company might have somebody sign a contract that they know, or they actually entice that person to break the contract in order to benefit. So I imagine in it like there's a contract made between men and God, and that contract is meant to be broken, and it needs to be broken because if it's fulfilled, if the law is fulfilled, which the law is like the contract, if that's fulfilled and it's not broken, then that person will benefit. And that's what's being prevented from happening. It says it in chapter 3 of Genesis. Like I said, it says that they were prevented from entering into the garden of eating from the tree. Could it be that the law was a sort of curse or contract that was made to be broken, that was unable to be fulfilled? In Romans chapter 3, it says, "Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." In Job, the sons of God come to God to present themselves and their work before God. This is often misrepresented. People often say, like,
God's bragging about him in heaven, about how good he is, and Satan comes along and says, I don't think he's that good.
That's not what happens. So what happens is, think of it as like a congressional oversight committee hearing, where God is like the oversight committee, and he's asking each witness, or each sector is coming to God and presenting their work before God. So it's Satan's turn to present his work. God says, what have you been doing? Where have you been going? And where have you been? And Satan says, I've been going all around earth. I've been going to and fro, up and down. And then God says, well, have you considered Job? He's righteous in every way. And so you've missed the mark. You missed the spot. And Satan says, yeah, well, I don't have jurisdiction over Job. I have no authority to work in Job's life because of his righteousness. And so at that point, and this is what the hearing is all for, and this is the purpose. So at that point, Satan is given a warrant. Like when you get a warrant, or when you get a court order, if a police gets a warrant, then it's very specific at the things that they're allowed to search for, and the things they're allowed to look through, and the area that they're allowed to search. So the authority that Satan is given is just over Job's life outside of his physical body. He's allowed to kill all his children, destroy everything in his life, and then there's another hearing. And so all the sons of God are there in this oversight committee hearing, and what God asks Satan and how Satan responds is exactly the same as how he asked him and how Satan responded the first time. It's much like a court hearing where you hear a lot of repetitive type language going on in a court hearing. It's Satan's turn, and again, God says the same exact thing. What have you been doing? Satan says the same thing, going to and fro. And then God says again, have you considered Job? He's still righteous. And Satan says, well, I did everything I could. If I could just attack him physically, I think I would be able to do my job. He's given a warrant. Again, don't kill Job, but here are the boundaries of this warrant. You're allowed to do everything but kill Job. So then Satan goes out again and he attacks Job physically. And so Job's at the very last straw. Job is holding on by a thread, and he still is righteous. He still hasn't sinned. And so his friends come out, and I mean, it could be interpreted that Satan's working through his friends to try to get him to sin, and that doesn't work. And so it's almost as if God's like, okay, obviously you can't do your job. Now I'm going to have to go out and do it myself. So God comes down there, because if God was bragging about Job, When Job's here, sitting here, his greatest servant, his greatest, most faithful person to him, God's now speaking to Job one-on-one. God isn't like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I love you so much. You are a righteous man. And that's not what God said. He's like, if you think that you're so good, you think that you're so powerful, who do you think you are? That's pretty much what God said to Job, until Job finally threw himself down in the ashes and agreed to God that he was prideful and that he had thought more of himself than he actually was. And at that point, they got him to say what they needed him to say. And then he was granted everything he could ever want until he finally died. God is not the God of the dead. He's the living God. Could it be that in Exodus, God tells them to go against a covenant that they already made with him in order to prevent them from living forever, in order to keep them under the laws of sin, which they could never fulfill? Could it be purposeful? Could he be trying to get them to break the laws in order to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and entering into the Garden of Eden? I don't know. Maybe. It seems like that might be going on. It seems like that might have happened in the case of Job. What is the tree of life, and what does it mean to live forever? I think that if you look at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what happened after they ate the fruit was that they realized something that they couldn't have comprehended before. That they were naked. And they couldn't undo that. They couldn't unsee it. They suddenly felt exposed. They suddenly understood something that they wouldn't have been able to understand before. And something that's really interesting about humans is we can't fully comprehend the idea of eternity. We can understand the concept, but we can't fully understand how exactly it occurs. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Something had to have come first, right? We can't understand how something could come from nothing, because nothing isn't even nothing if there isn't something. It just doesn't make sense to us. We can't fully understand it, because the only way we can explain it is with words that are incompatible with the actual concept. We could say eternity would mean forever. Well, forever is a measurement of time, and time is outside of eternity. There's no time in eternity. God's perspective is like 1,000 years is as one day, and one day is as 1,000 years. Neither one of them are different. It's like the same thing. There is no time within eternity, and that's very confusing for humans to understand. We actually can't grasp it. And I just wonder, had we eaten from the tree of life, would we understand eternity, and would we be outside of this spinning, flaming sword of time that is constantly keeping us in this time loop, constantly repeating and playing out the script of the scriptures? So the way that we see eternity, or the way that we see things through our skewed lens, may look like the end and the beginning are connected. The end and the beginning are one day apart. The end of the year is December 31st, and the very next day is January 1st. So the way that we may see it may look like the coming of God. We're always, in the Bible, we're always seeing the coming of Christ, the judgment of God, in the end. It's always in the end. Once there's a new heaven and a new earth, Jesus says, the first will be last and the last will be first. He says, blessed is he who stands at the beginning, for he shall know the end. Because in our perspective, it looks as though we're still building the kingdom of God. We're still building the body of Christ. Christ actually doesn't even exist yet until he's fully come into power and fully built. But he already did exist at the beginning, because that's only our perspective of it. But our perspective is wrong, because there is no beginning and end. There is no time at all. It's all happening all at once. But even that is not a good way to describe it, because when you say happening all at once is a measurement of time which doesn't exist within eternity. So like I said, trying to explain eternity is impossible because it's outside of our ability to describe things, and the way that we describe it is always contradictory to the actual thing. And it's the only way we can describe it is using words that are incompatible. It's like before Adam and Eve had realized that they were naked. Maybe they could have understood what it meant to be naked and could have understood what it meant to be exposed, but they couldn't really comprehend why you would how you could cover up your naked body with leaves, because you're still naked under the leaves. It doesn't make sense to them. It's like, okay, well, I'm naked either way. You can cover it with leaves, but I'm still naked. But then once they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, suddenly they understood what it meant to be naked and what it meant to be exposed. Something that they couldn't comprehend fully before. It seems as though the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the law. That was the knowledge of good and evil. It was given to them, the law. And the law and sin led to death. And that was what was already told to Adam and Eve, that they shall surely die. And it doesn't say that they were told not to eat from the tree of life beforehand, before they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They were never told not to eat from the tree of life. They were allowed to eat from that tree, but because they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they became like gods, knowing good and evil, and therefore were banished from the Garden of Eden in order to prevent them from eating from the tree of life. And God was the one, he used his angels, his cherubim, in order to prevent them from eating from the tree of life. And so it's almost as if he purposely was preventing them from fulfilling the law, because they were under the law, which the law was sin, which had to lead to death, because that's what was told to Adam and Eve. And Adam was the first man that sinned and brought that upon all of man. But Jesus was the second man, the second Adam, the new Adam, which was spirit and which fulfilled the law and became the fruit of life. So the tree of life is the tree of life is the cross, right? And then the fruit of the tree is Christ, because Christ said, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And when he said that, a lot of his followers left, and they were kind of disgusted by him saying that. They couldn't believe it. What is he saying? You have to eat your flesh and drink your blood? What? But what Christ was saying was that he was the fruit of the tree of life, hung up on the cross, hanging there like a fruit. Like you would drink the juice of a fruit and eat the flesh of a fruit. And it was the same way he always spoke, which was in parables. It was a parable.